Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. My name is Suzanne Sherman, and you've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where here we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. It is Monday, February 12th, year of our Lord 2018. Yay, Jeff Johnson and I were able to get our shows off today without a hitch. We try to do them on Monday mornings back to back, but it doesn't always work out. But here we are. We do have a phone number that is available when we have our live broadcasts. It is 717-467-1736. You can also send me messages privately on Facebook, facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire, facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman. I've got a couple pages. The one I monitor when we're live is the one that has the mountains in the background. My posts there are set to public so anybody can see them. By the way, speaking of my Facebook posts, and I'll return to the other stuff in a moment, I asked my followers the other day to submit your suggestions for books on President's Day, books that you find informative and would like to share. So go over there. I'll try and maybe read the list a little bit later, but there are some great examples there. I also asked followers, if you were president, what would you do and why? You can see the responses there as well. I'll be sharing some of those as well. Why am I doing this? Because next Monday is President's Day. So later in the show, I'm going to preface that discussion and focusing on several famous and infamous presidents. What is the proper role of the executive according to the Constitution as ratified, and how have we digressed from what that original role is? A lot of news organizations, mainstream media is going to be covering many presidents. You can expect to hear a lot of glorification of Abraham Lincoln. We're going to tell you the truth. And so keep that in mind as we have these discussions. We have a YouTube page, Cerberus Radio Network. Please subscribe. Please share. If you like any of our episodes, please also share those with your friends. You know, I've talked about this before. We are really at the mercy of social media, and the ability to disseminate our messages is really, again, at the mercy of hardcore leftists that don't like a lot of what we have to say. We're subject to the Facebook algorithms. A lot of our posts don't get shared, don't get seen by our followers. So if you really do like our message, please, I apologize, but you kind of have to make an effort to find us and to share us with your friends, to spread this word, our message of limited government, personal responsibility, preparedness. If things go south and we have to start over again, we'll know where we went wrong. We'll know where tyranny first reared its ugly head. And hopefully when we rise from the ashes, we can avoid the mistakes we made. So I want to encourage you also to check out our other programs. Jeff Johnson's show, The Paradigm Shift. We go live back to back whenever we can. His show was right before mine today. He gives you a good dose of Patrick Henry, as well as the intentions of the Constitution as ratified. We have a similar outlook where we try to look back. We still have that philosophy here, 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers. A lot of these solutions to what ails us today can be found in the thinking of those people back in that time. They sure seem a lot smarter than the ones we have now. Also, Jeff Johnson and Daniel Bailey have a show called The Renegade and the Rambler, show that usually goes on Sunday nights. Jeff was unavailable last night. I'm going to want to hear about this show that he went to. But John Zangaro, I want to welcome him as a contributor. He was with Daniel Bailey last night. He is running for state legislative position in Pennsylvania. So the founders of our network are in Pennsylvania, so you hear a lot of issues from that state. I am in Utah. I share a lot of issues from my state. And think about it, because a lot of the issues that we discuss are applicable and are relevant to where you live. You don't have to live in Pennsylvania or Utah to find this show relevant, at least I hope. We also have the Bailey Report. Daniel Bailey does his own thing as well. Brush Fires of Freedom, we have available on our Radio Co. replay list. That's a show coming out of Tucson, Arizona. Mike Meharry, I want to announce, from the 10th Amendment Center, has some new podcasts that we will be uploading and putting in the loop as well. He also has a podcast with Peter Schiff. They're called the Schiff Gold podcasts. And if you're interested in learning about gold and the benefits of investing in gold, what they may be for you, I always talk about our system of fiat currency is inherently unstable. Find ways to hedge your bets. So we will be getting into the proper role of the president. First, last week, I was in California, and I actually traveled through the area that was hit by not only tremendous wildfires, but subsequent to that, which is also very predictable, mudslides. They had a section of Interstate 101 that travels through, Highway 101 that travels from north to southern California. About 30 miles of that going through the Santa Barbara area were completely shut down. And that was in December. Driving through there a week ago, you could still see the damage everywhere. We went to a little town called Montecito where I believe 24 people were killed. 2 are still missing. And a restaurant where we stopped was opened for the first time in the day before. So it had been shut down that long. And I was talking to the waiter there asking, and Jeff, this will resonate with you because this really goes to something else we talk about on the show, and that is preparedness. And I said, how did this town get caught flat-footed? You know that these mountains are here. They're looming overhead. You had a great fire, significant rains, and the mudslides were very predictable, yet there was still a lot of damage there. And what he said was where most of the people died was in a voluntary evacuation center. And I'm not one that likes to do what I'm told, but when there's an evacuation order and it's a matter of life or death when it comes to something like mudslides, I think it's a good idea to get out. Jeff, what are your thoughts on evacuation? I think people should always have a way to be ready to get out of harm's way. That's the number one rule of survival. When we had Dr. Arthur T. Bradley on my show before, get out of the way.
Yeah, well, I have mixed feelings on this because I can honestly say, as a I don't know if I was preteens or teen, might have been 13. I lived on a small island on the East Coast, a barrier island on the East Coast called Long Beach Island, next island north of Atlantic City, and we periodically got hit by hurricanes. And I remember we did not evacuate for that. We stayed in place, and we obviously had no issues staying in place. Now, in the situation with these mudslides, it really is specific to the person, and it is just specific to where they are. If there's the danger of a mudslide affecting them is relatively little, there's no big hill next to them, I guess really there's no need to evacuate. But you still have to be prepared, because obviously you said the highway was affected, Highway 101 was affected. I'm sure other roads were affected, so there was probably no ability to get out to get groceries. Power might have been out. So you really have to be, if you're going to stay in place, you have to be prepared, or just plan on getting to some place where it will be safe at one of the evacuation centers where the government can provide for you.
Plus, with hurricanes, I think you also are aware of geographically where you're sitting with regards to risk of the storm surge, because as we know, the flooding is the greatest risk when it comes to hurricanes. And if you're on high grounds and you're going to be okay, I think I would be reticent to leave my property as well, particularly when you have situations like looting, if there's property damage or some sort of unrest afterwards. So again, it is a very personal thing.
Right. I lived on 15th Street growing up in Ship Bottom, New Jersey. There's Central Avenue, there's the Boulevard, Central Avenue, and Barnegat Avenue where I lived. Central Avenue is in the middle of the island, and then Barnegat Avenue is on the bay side of the island. Those two both would always flood, no matter what. It could just be a regular big rainstorm, and they'd flood. Where I was, right in the middle of 15th Street, was a very high spot on the island. We never, I don't ever remember ever having water at my part of 15th Street ever. Even in the hurricanes, I don't remember there being too much water there. There might have been a couple inches, if anything. So it was just a matter of knowing where we knew where we lived.
Regardless, I think it's a good idea to have your car with gasoline in it. Never leave it where, oh gosh, I'm going to have to go get gas down the block before I get out. You might not be able to. Have your car full of gas, have some basic supplies in there, some food, some water, some extra clothing. It doesn't have to take up your entire vehicle, but it really hit home because this is stuff that you just assume happens elsewhere. You only see it in the news, but when you actually talk to the people that experienced it, it really resonates. And just seeing a woman, I remember the image of her just shoveling still mud out of her driveway by herself. And she just looked so tired. Another thing that happened recently is some personal friends of, I know he's a friend of yours as well, Jeff, they had a house fire, and he showed this and what happened on Facebook, on social media, and the family almost perished. Fortunately, one of the sons woke up smelling the smoke, but a living room or family area that had the doors closed was where the fire had started. So if the son hadn't woken up, the whole family would have perished. As it was, they lost 2 cats, and they did not have a smoke alarm. We've talked about house fires as probably a danger that is something that we are all equally susceptible to. So this was just a reminder. I find those smoke detectors so annoying, Jeff, because those batteries choose to wear out at 3 o'clock in the morning when you have a busy day ahead of you, and you're just tempted to disconnect them. So this is a reminder that they can save your lives, and I know that they will be installing them as a result of this fire once they've rebuilt. Did you want to have any comments on that before we move on?
Yeah, I just want to make a couple quick comments. Because of my prior life, I was a firefighter and I did code enforcement. It's very, very important to have smoke detectors and that they are functioning. Don't remove the batteries. Have some 9-volt batteries sitting around the house, ready to go. If it starts to chirp, change it right away. The other thing is, a lot of people do not realize you need to replace them about every 10 years. They do. Their ability to detect the smoke goes away over the years. So about 10 years, think about changing your beyond changing the batteries, change the whole detector. I have wired ones in my place. About 2 years ago now, I went and bought new wired ones, replaced them. So now these are brand new, they're fresh, and I know they'll work. So make sure you know about the age of your detectors and change them if they're over 10 or 12 years old. Look at the manufacturer's suggested dates on them as far as when they need to be replaced.
You know, it was interesting too, as I asked, people had asked how the fire had started, and it was a piece of laundry over a heating vent. I would never have expected it to start like that. So it sounds very strange, but again, anywhere where we have the ventilation systems, keep those clear. And this could literally be a matter of life or death. So I'm delighted that they are all safe. And it's very hard to see your friends going through this, especially when you've been in that home and you see the pictures of where you sat as a family enjoying each other, that had happened. But that's, again, little reminders that we always need to be prepared and ready to handle these situations. Even in the situation in California, if there was a mudslide and you couldn't get out, do you have food? Do you have water? Do you have a way? It's not as important to stay warm out there, but can you stay there for a week or two, a day or two? Assess your situation. Speaking of preparedness, I did show up. I was on Prepper Talk Radio on Friday with Scott Stallings and Shane Coles, and we discussed firearms preparedness and also exposed their audience to the national reciprocity debate. And Scott Stallings had been one that was previously in support of national reciprocity because it does sound like a great idea. But as we know, and we discuss all the time here, be very careful which powers, which rights of ours we surrender to the general government, because we will never get them back. And if you want to read more about that, if you haven't yet, I will post my article. It's called National Reciprocity is a Trojan Horse. The 10th Amendment Center published that, and it has converted a lot of people. Some people just refuse to accept that the Bill of Rights was only a limit on Congress. Some people refuse to stop calling the Second Amendment a constitutional right. It's an unalienable right that existed before it was put down on the Second Amendment. It grants us no rights. Congress has no right to regulate firearms whatsoever. These are issues that are left to the people. Nationalism is really the cause of many of our illnesses right now. I can't think of many things that are not. When we get people in charge that want to turn us away from our traditional values that we're seeing here. We had Dan Fisher on K-Talk Radio with us on Inside the News with Paul Jensen last Thursday. He's running for the governor of the state of Oklahoma, and his main platform is premised on abolishing human abortion. Pro-life groups simply want to regulate it. I made a post the other day that pro-life groups are to life, when we talk about abortion here, as the NRA is to gun rights. And that upset a lot of people. But you know, Jeff, I think our message here is important. We have to get people to think differently. We have to get them to turn away from a national solution. Again, with regards to President's Day coming up next Monday, there's going to be a lot of talk of who our leader is, who the leader of the free world is. Well, forget the free world right now. Let's talk about how realistic it is to have one leader for 320 plus million people. Also, we have a national government that is kowtowing to a move and capitulating on immigration issues. We have learned, or we should have learned, from Sweden. What's happening in Sweden? Mass Arab immigration has completely turned this country upside down. It is the rape capital of the world. And what happens? Germany starts to do the same thing. France starts to do the same thing. And we're seeing their culture and their people suffering from this. Before I get to the issue of the role of the president, I want to share this story and one more with you. But here's something that came, an article that came out of Front Page Magazine. Sweden appoints a Pakistani Muslim as the head of the National Heritage Board. A Pakistani Muslim is the head of Sweden's National Heritage Board. He readily admits that he has not read anything about Sweden's cultural heritage, but his new job is really not about preserving and protecting Sweden's cultural heritage and historical sites at all. If you think this is irrelevant, think monuments. Think what is happening, about what is happening here in the United States and the destruction of our heritage, because the victors in the war against Southern independence won. They continue to wage warfare on this culture. Now Sweden is waging warfare on their own culture. Khazar Mahmoud once rode his motorcycle around Sweden, the article is telling us, in an apparently failed attempt to discover what being Swedish consisted of. He's using his position as a Swedish National Heritage Board not to highlight and celebrate that heritage, but to downplay Sweden's cultural heritage and history, and to create a false narrative, sound familiar, that will compel Swedes to accept mass Muslim migration. He says he doesn't want to simply alert people to Viking artifacts and the like, but to use Sweden's history to create a narrative that will make migrants, Muslim migrants, part of something. We're experiencing that same phenomenon here. California, I shared with you a month or so ago a story about how the LGBTQ LMNOP agenda has infiltrated the school system, where they have adopted a state curriculum glorifying, highlighting members of the LGBT community, even so far as assuming or making some false statements that historic figures may have been gay to promote that agenda. So we see this taking away of our culture to promote other agendas, be it a racial, cultural, or, as we see in California, the LGBTQ LMNOP agenda. But this is still part and parcel of taking us away from our traditional values. So a Swedish researcher last October gained national headlines by claiming that burial costumes of Viking graves dated back to the 9th and 10th centuries had been found to be inscribed with the name Allah. The intent was obvious: to convince Swedes that Islam had always been a part of Sweden. And we've heard some of this same rhetoric here as well. Obama said that, Muslims were highly influential in the founding of our country. So his role now as head of the Swedish National Heritage Board. And this is something to think of. Who put him there? The Swedes put him there. The cuts against the idea of tourism. The article says, the idea of tourism, Asian sites, and non-Muslim religious installations that are found in Sweden. What they're trying to say also is that anything that occurred before the time of Islam is really irrelevant. Anyway, I'll post this article. It's out of Front Page Magazine, but it is relevant to what we are doing to ourselves today culturally. I had mentioned this before, that for 200 years, we had sought some sort of a cohesive population. John Adams had even said that a common culture can unite people against tyrants, but tyrants can easily divide and rule an acultural or multicultural people. That's out of an article a friend of mine, James Rutledge Rush, wrote, and I've shared that before as well. So a few weeks ago, Jeff, do you have that news article? We can post the sound for it. I had shared a story of a man named Don Cameron, who is a veteran of the Korean War, and he had a falling out with his stepdaughter, whose name was on the deed of the property in which he was living. It had belonged to his wife. His wife was being hospitalized for Alzheimer's. This is a story out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His stepdaughter, because they had a falling out, sought assistance from the Veterans Administration to send him a caregiver. The caregiver eventually defrauded this man, got everything that he owned. They dispossessed him of his home, took his money out of his account every month it came in. She had him sign her over as his power of attorney, falsely alleging that she was his daughter. Do you have that update that I sent you, Jeff?
I have the media file right here ready to go.
Why don't we play it and then we'll finish up with this story.
At 6, an update to a KDKA investigation. Police in Hermitage filed charges against a caregiver accused of taking advantage of her client, allegedly stealing money and taking over his home. Andy Sheehan has the very latest.
Former home health aide Melissa Miller was entrusted with the care of her elderly client, but now faces up to 7 years in jail for ripping him off. Anything you want to say, Melissa? Arraigned this morning on charges of theft by deception for milking his bank accounts.
I just flat got took. People robbed me left and right.
2 months ago, we told you about retired Army veteran Don Cameron and how Miller had been assigned to care for him, but soon moved her entire family into his home. Don then signed this power of attorney, which gave Miller complete control over his finances. Cameron's stepdaughter, Nadine Carson, showed us pages of bank statements with withdrawals and charges at restaurants, convenience stores, even the Cleveland Air Show and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. At the same time, utilities went unpaid and Cameron's car was repossessed.
They've stripped everything from this man. Everything. His life, he worked for this his whole life, it's gone. His home, his cars, his property. They've destroyed it. and now they won't leave.
Now Hermitage police have charged Miller with felonies for the unauthorized withdrawals of more than $2,000 from Cameron's bank account and more than $6,000 from his credit union, while her husband, Chuck, says the couple took care of Cameron and that he okayed the purchases. He was paying all of his bills. He was not in arrears, and after you guys moved in,
he was.
all of his money is
He was in
all of
arrears.
his money is gone. He has no money. He's broke.
He's broke?
He is.
He gets money every month. How's he broke?
Meanwhile, the Millers have been served and are being evicted from Cameron's house, and Carson hopes Melissa Miller lands in jail.
I feel like maybe justice will prevail in this case, and I hope it does.
And perhaps it will serve as a warning to those who would exploit the vulnerability of the elderly. That kind of behavior won't be tolerated and will be prosecuted. In Mercer County, Andy Sheehan, KDKA TV News.
Yeah, one of my Facebook followers had sent me the notification of this story because this was actually her uncle, and she was kind enough to send me the update that we just got. It was very infuriating for the family. It just took forever to get these squatters out of their house. The house has been pretty much destroyed. And the husband's words, Jeff, to me, I think they implicate him as well. I would not be surprised if he wasn't charged. He just says, who cares? He's not in arrears. He gets money every month. There is absolutely no regret at all in what they seem to have done. And why is this story important? It's important because this is what happens when we turn our backs on our family, when we lose that connection, when we simply assume that somebody else is going to be responsible for those, whether or not we're on good terms with them. When you turn to the government or outside sources like this for help, particularly the government, you're going to be disappointed. And I'm just glad nothing more serious happened to this man. It appears that they have mended fences with the family members, and there is a GoFundMe account and that they have set up for him to try and help get him back on his feet again. And I did post that on my Facebook page. We'll get it on our fan page as well. We do have a fan page, facebook.com/CRN, as well as our show page, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. Before I move on, did you want to chime in on that at all, Jeff?
No, I felt the same thing when I saw the husband. If you watch the video, it's a little bit different. He was just very belligerent. He just in his body posture and everything, he had no remorse for what they did to this guy, and they took way more than they're charging him with. If his monthly income is what it is, and he has nothing left, they've stolen way more than what that few $1,000s they're claiming.
Well, not only that, I mean, they repossessed his car. There's stuff that he cannot get back. And just the arrogance again in the husband's voice, that there was no remorse whatsoever. So these people are still out there, and I believe they would do the same thing again. So look after your loved ones. This is just really important. We do have a responsibility. You know, we talked about this also going back to hurricanes and hurricane preparedness. In Hurricane Matthew, the waters with a storm surge was coming into this woman's house, and her daughter, who lived far away, was calling the local 911 dispatch saying, my mom is in a house with my father who's in a wheelchair, who the water's rising. My mom's on the cabinet and on the countertop. What can we do? And they said there's no help available. Now, obviously, the daughter couldn't have gone and rescued this gentleman herself, but this is why it's important to have a plan in effect. As a friend of mine who is also an elder law specialist said, that these people are judgment proof that went after the Don Cameron. They're never going to be paying restitution for this man. So I urge anybody that feels it in their heart to help this guy out. The GoFundMe link is on the page. What we'll do is take a quick break, and then we will return with a discussion on the proper role of the executive branch. Is it supposed to be somebody that makes a difference in our life, or do we have an elected king? So we'll ask you to rejoin us over here at the Cerberus Radio Network for that discussion. This is the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman.
The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping. The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. My name's Suzanne Sherman, and you've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where here we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. It is Monday, February 12th, year of our Lord 2018. Yay, Jeff Johnson and I were able to get our shows off today without a hitch. We try to do them on Monday mornings back to back, but it doesn't always work out. But here we are. We do have a phone number that is available when we have our live broadcasts. It is 717-467-1736. You can also send me messages privately on Facebook, facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire, facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman. I've got a couple pages. The one I monitor when we're live is the one that has the mountains in the background. My posts there are set to public so anybody can see them. By the way, speaking of my Facebook posts, and I'll return to the other stuff in a moment, I asked my followers the other day to submit your suggestions for books on President's Day, books that you find informative and would like to share. So go over there. I'll try and maybe read the list a little bit later, but there are some great examples there. I also asked followers, if you were president, what would you do and why? You can see the responses there as well. I'll be sharing some of those as well. Why am I doing this? Because next Monday is President's Day. So later in the show, I'm going to preface that discussion and focusing on several famous and infamous presidents. What is the proper role of the executive according to the Constitution as ratified, and how have we digressed from what that original role is? A lot of news organizations, mainstream media is going to be covering many presidents. You can expect to hear a lot of glorification of Abraham Lincoln. We're going to tell you the truth. And so keep that in mind as we have these discussions. We have a YouTube page, Cerberus Radio Network. Please subscribe. Please share. If you like any of our episodes, please also share those with your friends. You know, I've talked about this before. We are really at the mercy of social media and the ability to disseminate our messages. Like a lot of what we have to say, we're subject to the Facebook algorithms. A lot of our posts don't get shared, don't get seen by our followers. So if you really do like our message, please, I apologize, but you kind of have to make an effort to find us and to share us with your friends, to spread this word, our message of limited government, personal responsibility, preparedness. If things go south and we have to start over again, we'll know where we went wrong. We'll know where tyranny first reared its ugly head. And hopefully when we rise from the ashes, we can avoid the mistakes we made. So I want to encourage you also to check out our other programs. Jeff Johnson's show, The Paradigm Shift, we go live back to back whenever we can. His show was right before mine today. He gives you a good dose of Patrick Henry, as well as the intentions of the Constitution as ratified. We have a similar outlook where we try to look back. We still have that philosophy here, 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers. A lot of these solutions to what ails us today can be found in the thinking of those people back in that time. They sure seem a lot smarter than the ones we have now. Also, Jeff Johnson and Daniel Bailey have a show called The Renegade and the Rambler, show that usually goes on Sunday nights. Jeff was unavailable last night. I'm going to want to hear about this show that he went to. But John Zangaro, I want to welcome him as a contributor. He was with Daniel Bailey last night. It's necessary to create a whole system of government that has completely thrown off its restraints. As we know, there were 3 branches to the general government that were created, so put forth in Articles 1, 2, and 3. That is the legislative, executive, and the judicial branches, respectively. What we're taught since we start studying this topic in school, grammar school, many of us, we write our little triangle on a piece of paper. I got fancy and used colored pencils for mine because I really love this stuff. I thought it was really fascinating. And we do our triangle, and it was always on an equilateral triangle. The implication being that the 3 branches of government were separate and they were going to have a system of checks and balances on each other. But you have to ask yourself, were they intended to be equal? And what we have to get away from also is forgetting about the ultimate check and balance on this 3-headed monster, which was the states. Remember, we were the United States of America, not the United State of America, which is essentially what we have become. There's a great resource if you really want to dig deep and just hunker down and read about the original intentions of the Constitution. There's a book by that same name by M.E. Bradford. There's a great book. It's a little paperback called The Founding Fathers Guide to the Constitution. Brian McClanahan spells out very adroitly the debates that went forth into deciding what kind of an executive we were going to have at the Philadelphia Convention. There was a spectrum of options going from a very strong executive, almost an elected monarch, to a decentralized government as opposed to the Virginia plan. The Virginia plan was put forth by James Madison, which would essentially have a bicameral legislature, both represented by population. As we know, that was voted down. This was rejected outright, but that's exactly what we have now with the 17th Amendment. Remember, the Senate was supposed to be the ultimate vanguard of the states' rights at the time. James Hamilton was the strongest advocate, he and James Wilson, of a strong president. So what we have now is we look for a president, and if you want to read again about all the debates going back and forth in the Philadelphia Convention, I recommend Brian's book. What we have now, we look for a president to solve all our problems. Jeff, I believe we have a sound clip that was, it really tells a lot about what we're looking for these days. Can you play that for me?
Sure, here we go.
Why are you here?
To get some money.
What kind of money?
Obama money.
Where's it coming from?
Obama.
And where did Obama get it?
I don't know. His stash. I don't know. I don't know where he got it from. But he giving it to us to help us. We love him. That's why we voted for him. Obama.
Did you get an application to fill out yet?
I sure did. And I filled it out. And I am waiting to see what the results are going to be.
Will you know today how much money you're getting?
No, I won't. But I'm waiting for a phone call.
Where's the money coming from?
I believe it's coming from the city of Detroit or the state.
Where did they get it from?
Some funds that was given by Obama.
And where did Obama get the funds?
Obama might have gotten the funds from, I have no idea. Tell you the truth, he's the president.
In downtown Detroit, Ken Rogulski, WJR News.
So what happens when we have these presidential election cycles? We look to the president as the individual now who is going to be our leader, not only our leader, but the leader of the free world. And he's going to solve our problems. He's going to fill up our cars with gas. He's going to provide, in the case of that clip, Obama money. And you're going to see a certain contingencies of the demographics that look for a president who's going to do something for them. Remember, the only legitimate role of government is to defend our liberties, but we have devolved into a system that wants government to solve all our problems. So the role of the executive, going back to what the founders' intentions were, was very limited. Referring back to this equilateral triangle, the most powerful branch of government was supposed to be the legislative branch. Why? Because they had two houses of Congress, the first being based on representation by population, and the second was each state had two representatives, the states, again, being the ultimate vanguard of the general government maintaining its constitutional restraints and the states' rights. We have this thing called the 10th Amendment, which was supposed to guarantee that as well. If you look at what they finally came up with, was Article 2 sets forth the powers of the president. The executive power is very limited. He's the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and the militia when called into service. He can appoint ambassadors. He can grant reprieves, pardons for offenses. He can get into treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate. And he can have the power to fill up vacancies that happen during the recess of the Senate. He can also appoint members of the Supreme Court and members of the federal judiciary. If you look through this, what you're seeing right now and what people are calling for him to do is really an area that is reserved to the legislative branch. Jeff, in your show, can you update us? Because this was news to me about Donald Trump with regards to climate change. One of the things he was elected to avoid was engaging in this leftist ideology that climate change, man-made climate change, is a threat to national security. So not only has he done an about-face on foreign policy, and not only has the GOP funded Planned Parenthood again, not only has the GOP-led Congress agreed to borrow almost or over $1 trillion, which is now getting to be, it's increasing based on this. What's this deal with the climate change?
I'm just pulling up that article again. There was a bill signed by Donald Trump. Let's see. Okay, I just got it pulled up. Let me scroll down here. This is past Tuesday. This was this is actually an older article. I don't know how I just found it on my newsfeed, but this is an older article that he is recognizing climate change. So he might have made an about face on this. I just saw the date is a little older, so it's a few months old. But
Okay.
even so, if the Pentagon is still going to be doing this, the Pentagon is still going to be assessing how climate change over the next 20 years. So that part is going to maintain itself because they're not going to give up the funding to do this stuff. They're going to, I mean, that part says here it requires the Pentagon to conduct a report on specific vulnerabilities of American military assets to climate change over the next 20 years. In addition, the amendment formally recognizes that the scientific blah, blah, blah. And then this was the one part of that. The study was to find out how it impacts stability in areas of the world where the United States Armed Forces are operating today and where strategic implications for future conflicts exist. So even though this might be an older story, they're still going to be doing that. They're going to be looking for how they can get into new wars all over the world.
Well, and thank you for that. And as we were going through this presidential election cycle, one of the main justifications I heard for Donald Trump, again, he has this whole platform, Make America Great Again. And to me, I think America is great, but not because of its government, but in spite of its government. And if we look to a leader to fix things on a national level, we're always going to be disappointed. That's why we're going to get into tomorrow a bit of judicial review and explain how the federal judiciary has completely abrogated this concept of 10th Amendment states' powers and what they never delegated to the general government. But I decided to write an article, and it's called Good Enough Politicians Are Not Good Enough. And I really wanted to address the issue of why we seek a member of the executive branch, the president, to solve all our problems. And every politician, for every new appointee, we hear the same thing. We're never going to find one that we agree with on everything. Nobody's perfect. We just have to do what we can to keep moving in the right direction. Here's an example of the right direction being the wrong direction, was Donald Trump's support of national reciprocity. This is a sophomoric approach, and it always gives us the same result. We always compromise on our principles. Now, again, I wrote this article before the GOP capitulated on the budget, before the GOP capitulated on borrowing $1 trillion more, before they funded Planned Parenthood. Again, we are compromising on our principles. The compromise also, as we can see now, goes in one direction in favor of big government. What did Rand Paul say? When the GOP is involved or is in charge, we don't have any conservatives in government. So what is it we're ending up with? Candidates who, once elected, perpetuate a system of government that is more about maintaining power than it is protecting liberties of the people they were elected to represent. This is really ringing true based on what we're seeing now. Are we going to have a perfect candidate on all issues? No, that's absolutely not going to be impossible at all. Here's what I'm going to settle for. I would settle for mere competence on one single issue. I am a one issue kind of gal. Respect for the federalist system of government that the framers set us up with. With that comes adherence to the limitations put in place to constrain them. Remember, and I've talked about this time and time again, I know you do too as well, Jeff, the Constitution set up a federal system. The central government had few enumerated powers, and those not delegated to it remained with the states. This is why Dan Fisher's campaign in Oklahoma is going to be crucial to getting this balance of power shifted back towards the states. The powers of the new government were few. The powers of the states were numerous and indefinite. James Madison said the government the Constitution created was one that was federal in nature, not national. What this means is that the powers the states granted to the general government were specifically listed, and the powers of Congress being enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. The powers of the executive and the judicial branches were detailed in Articles 2 and 3, respectively. And as we're seeing now, the power of the executive, of the president, has increased exponentially as time goes on. I would really like to see a president who would say, I think what my role is to wake people up and realize that I am not a leader. What we need to do is get back to what the intention was by putting a representative form of government and having the people decide and not have one leader for 320 million people. So when we look to a perfect candidate when it comes to national elections, what should we be looking for? Their stance on abortions, gay rights, environments, schools, jobs, the economy, immigration policies, healthcare, the war on drugs, or their opposition. Yeah.
I hate to interrupt your thought here, but we do have a caller named Dwayne Stovall on the line.
Fantastic. Okay, for those of you who are unaware, Dwayne Stovall is running for the United States Senate to get John Cornyn out of his seat. And Dwayne, your timing is perfect because right now we are talking about the United States Senate as a vanguard of the states' powers, as well as we have an extremely bloated presidency, and we have we've abrogated our federalist system. Why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what you plan to do to fight this?
Well, hi, Suzanne. My name is Dwayne Stovall. I am running for U.S. Senate here in Texas for the position currently held by John Cornyn. And what I'm calling you about is exactly that, is getting back to the origins and the original design of the U.S. Senate seat and what its purpose is. And that purpose is to protect the best interests of the state predominantly. There's nothing that comes before you putting the interests of the citizens of your state first. What we've done today is we've got this national government that really is no longer bicameral, meaning there's not really two bodies. We pretend like there's two bodies, and we teach their children that there's a House of Representatives, or what we call the People's House. And we've got this Senate that's got this governing body that's supposed to have longer terms to be able to have time to really debate and think about what they're doing. And what it really is a single parliament of they're all popularly elected with no really difference between the way they behave other than the fact that they have differing terms. So my goal is to crash into that head on and change the discourse and show people exactly how the office is supposed to work. That office was designed by people like George Mason and Roger Sherman. George Mason called it the mechanism of self-defense for the states. And that's exactly what it's supposed to do. But today, I don't think anyone would argue that the Senate works more in favor of growing the federal government's own power than it does in protecting the state's ability to manage its own affairs.
You know, you mentioned Roger Sherman, and he had also said that the executive branch was nothing more than an institution for carrying the will of the legislator into effect and to execute the laws and nothing more. And as you mentioned, also James Wilson agreed. So what we need to do is get the Senate to get its power back to be the deliberative body. Do you ever foresee any repealing of the 17th Amendment, or is this a lost cause?
No, the 17th Amendment is not going anywhere. We're 4, 5, 6 generations now into the indoctrination that we, the people, need to have a voice in voting for our U.S. senators, which is complete hogwash. There's, like here in Texas, there's over 800,000 of us to a member of Congress, and there's almost 29 million people in the state. Nobody knows who's running for the U.S. Senate. Nobody knows them personally. So that the idea that you're going to make a competent decision on who's going to represent the state, and it's going to be made by 99.9% of people who don't have context of who these people are, it totally destroys the idea of having a legislative body that's limited in number. Like in Texas, we would have a U.S. senator that was responsible to a body of 150 state reps. Well, it's much easier for 150 state reps to evaluate the behavior of a single individual than it is for 29 or 30 million people to try and assess that from a multi-million-dollar ad campaign telling you that these candidates are just like you, like John Cornyn constantly tells us. So we know they're not like us, and, you know, marketing works. So it keeps power in the hands of the wrong people, and it keeps
You're right. You have an organization called Get Off My State. One of the things I talk about frequently is scale and representation. We went to war to escape a system under which we had no representation or minimal representation. And I'm feeling, and I say this all the time, we have surrendered our revolutionary legacy. Discuss a little bit about what scale means, how we can get that back.
Well, the scale, as people you and I have both read and listened to, like people like Donald Livingston and people who've studied republics throughout history and the effect of scale on societies, scale is the single most important issue to a free society that's never talked about. No, they don't teach it in school. They don't talk about the ratio of representation in your government to the people. They basically blanket our children, and us too, for multi-generations, we blanket our people with the idea that you're the most free people in the world, you're in a representative government. There, go home. We're not represented. It is literally, statistically, truthfully impossible for a single individual to represent the best interest of over 800,000 people. That's an impossibility. You can't fathom that actually taking place. So we're kind of living in this la-la land of representation. We don't really have it. And the more the population grows and the larger that differentiation gets between the number of us and the number of and a single representative of Congress, what people don't seem to grasp is that we're centralizing power in the hands of these few people at an astronomical rate. So we run around pretending we live in this, 1776 republic, when in fact we live in a very centralized, tyrannical, almost monarchical style of government. We elect a king every 4 years, and we have a parliament that stands around, furls their brow and rubs their thumbs together and says, well, it's really tough work. And we're just really waiting for these 9 unelected, well-connected Harvard and Yale lawyers in robes to tell us what we can do and what we can't do, even though the document that we're supposed to be based on tells the Congress they control 99.9% of what the Supreme Court does. Purely, they own that judicial branch.
And the thing is, so many people are uneducated as well about the role of the president, which is why we're focusing on that as well. And with the Senate now being, directly elected by the people in the states, it's very hard to get people to stand up and have the courage to say, no, you can't have this. And we see it all the time. What they want, I submitted a poll to my listeners. What would you do if you were president? I saw another poll on a friend of mine's page who, while he is very like-minded, his followers are very different according to how we think. Let me give you some of the answers we have seen. What would you do if you were president? Somebody here says, follow the healthcare problem in Spain. It really works, as well as almost everyone is covered and medical practitioners care about their patients' health. Here, apparently they don't. Develop a work ethic like the Germans, who are systemic, thorough, and produce quality goods. Another one is work on keeping peace with other countries. I like that idea. But we're seeing a lot of amnesty for the dreamers now. Preserve federal lands, stop allowing disposal of untreated waste into waterways. Dwayne, let me know when you find something here that is in conformance with Article 1, Section 8 or Article...
when I find something that actually involves the president.
Yeah, fix education. Teach children respect, discipline, honor, and responsibility. Teach children to live in harmony with nature and the cycle of the universe.
Oh my God.
Stop all GMO food. I mean, this is what we have come to, where we think that a president can do all this.
Yeah, we're looking for a king. Some of us are looking for the Messiah, and in a man's form. They're looking for a silver bullet of a leader, a king, someone that can control their lives and make their lives be fruitful. And it's asinine.
How would you as a senator keep your seat by saying no to these people?
Well, for me, I look at being a U.S. senator as an opportunity to use that. It's not a bully pulpit, but it's definitely a different level of attention. To use that to actually speak outward, away from the Senate. These guys do press releases and they put out a little thing here and there. I think there's a much more, by actually addressing people in general regularly and explaining to them, no, you don't want the executive branch to do things outside of, they don't have the authority to do the things that you want them to do. And this is what I plan to do. I plan on using Article 3 to remand the federal government's authority out of most of the social issues that these people are talking about. And it's funny to me, while you're talking, I'm still thinking scale, and people, and I run into this every week, people always make comparisons from the United States to a country, and they'll pick out, like, I think you're one of the people you quoted there said, we need to compare ourselves to, or you use the Spain's particular style of something. And you can look at them and go, well, you know what, maybe it works for Spain, but you know what? Spain is conducive to California by itself. So don't compare 320 million people across 50 different states to a single country that's barely as large as one of our states. They don't work. It's apples and oranges. I had a few people who were kind of shocked last week at a presentation. I said, somebody made the reference to Canada. And I said, oh, that's great. We can compare Canada, but you can't compare Canada to the USA as a whole. They said, oh, why? And I said, because Canada's about the same size as California. And they just looked around the room, and I said, you get that? They're about the same population. You're really not comparing the same issue.
It's not even working in California. California now has the most poverty in this entire continental landmass. It just surpassed Mississippi. Look at the homeless population. You can see these tent cities in Anaheim. California. It is failing miserably. It is the Bay Area, Silicon Valley is having an exodus of taxpayers while they have an influx of people who are going to be burdens on the system. So we're going to see what happens. What happens with this? It is proven ineffective, yet people still embrace it. Dwayne Stovall for U.S. Senate. Really quickly, how can people follow you?
They can go to Dwayne Stovall, at Dwayne Stovall on Twitter, or Texans for Stovall on Facebook. They can go to lessdcmoretx.com or texansforstovall.com or dwaynestovall.com, and it all leads to the same place. But I start traveling in April. I'll hit all 254 counties in the state of Texas over the next 2 years. And if you're interested in limited government and someone who's an originalist is going to say it plainly, contact me, let me know, and follow me.
All right, we are out of time. Dwayne Stovall for United States Senate. We pray that you win. This is the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny.